Thank you very much indeed. And firstly, apologies for my croaky voice. I've been on the road for quite a long time now, so this is the end of a 3-week tour for me of working, wearing many different hats. CBM is an international Christian development organisation that I work full-time with, but as I was introduced, I was also the UK's representative on the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities for 4 years. So my main work has been with empowering and facilitating the capacity building of organisations of persons with disabilities. But I've also worn some other hats. I've been part of the independent monitoring mechanism in the United Kingdom, the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And most recently, I've just come back from the Caribbean, where I've been working with governments to really try and help them to write their first state report after having ratified the convention. So I'm in a really great position of being able to look at the convention from many different angles. And being a disabled person myself, of course, it's true to my heart, and it's something that I'm passionate about and drives me. So it's a real honour and a pleasure to be here in Dublin. It's great to be back in Ireland. I studied at Queen's University in the north for 3 years. That's where I did my first degree, and spent quite a lot of time down here in the south in my holidays. So it's really lovely to be back here. And I do love greyhounds. And my greyhound, Fraser, is from here, from Ireland. So it's great he has a home with me in England now. My husband, who's my assistant, you'll see a little bit of him later. I have a video for you too. So it's not just all me talking, because that's really boring, and keynote address sounds really grand, and I'm not grand at all, and I don't have a lot of grand things to say, but I'd like to talk a little bit about what I've been doing. So as other people have said, the CRPD is an international human rights treaty, and crucially it's legally binding. This is really important. It's been ratified, as Gary said, by 173 countries. That's out of 193, so we're almost at universal ratification. This is absolutely fantastic achievement globally. And in terms of that global recognition, you could say the other treaties that were mentioned around rights on women, rights on children, that there's global recognition of being very rapidly ratified by so many, is seen as just as important. And we must hold on to that importance that the global community really have placed on that. But with rights, with those rights come responsibilities, and that's what we're here to talk about a lot today. And I've seen a lot of the ways in which government have tried to implement those rights in their countries through the committee's work. There are obligations on states. So when the Irish government does ratify, please soon, then it will have key responsibilities. It has, of course, at the core of those responsibilities to promote, to protect, and ensure that all persons with disabilities in Ireland have their rights upheld. What crucially happens is that it explains what the state has to do and what it must not do. So, in terms of not discriminating against persons with disabilities, and there have been some examples already. It also explains what the state should do. So, in terms of creating an enabling environment where there are no barriers faced by persons with disabilities. But along with those rights come key obligations. So, within the convention, there are key obligations. So, for example, one of the obligations is about awareness raising, making sure that everybody knows about the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the rights within that people should be expected to be entitled to within. And many governments say, oh, we have a national human rights institution, or we have organisations of people with disabilities. They can help promote it. They can raise people's awareness. But actually, the responsibility is on the state. This is the state's job. Now, if the state wants to contract it out and pay somebody else to do it, that's fine. But the buck stops with the state. They must do this. Equally, in terms of accessibility, Article 9, this is an obligation on the state. And that doesn't mean just having a ramp, of course. It means having sign language interpreters. It means having information and communication in accessible formats. It means making sure that systems are accessible as well as policies are accessible. Article 31 on data and statistics, really important. If you don't know how many people in your country you have, different types of impairments, if you don't monitor that regularly, if you don't understand the quality of people's lives with disabilities in your countries, your government cannot provide the services and all of the other things that it needs to. It was mentioned about the guiding principles of the Convention. This is really unique to the CRPD, to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. If the government did one thing only and looked at Article 3 and all of the key principles and lived by those principles on a daily basis in everything it did, then it'd be 90% of the way there. Respect for dignity. Monica's already mentioned this. Absolutely crucial. Everybody wants dignity at the end of the day. Autonomy. The freedom to make your own choices. Independence. Non-discrimination. Participating and being included. Today, they're a packed house. I think twice as many people would have been here if they'd had the opportunity to. So you're participating in an event on an equal basis with others. Respect for difference. Equality of opportunity, and this is a really key one. This is really very, very key for the Convention because it's not about treating everybody the same, equal treatment. Equality of opportunity means sometimes you need to treat people with disabilities a little bit differently in order for them to have equality of opportunity. And that's where the ideas of reasonable accommodation and the changes that are required to give everyone an equal playing field. Accessibility, I've talked about. Equality between men and women and the evolving capacities of children. If all of those principles were adhered to, and all of us do that in our daily lives, if the government did that from ratifying, it would be off to an absolutely flying start. A number of the different rights within the Convention have been mentioned already. I'm not going to talk about them at length or an exhaustive list, but there's no hierarchy between the rights. All the rights have equal value. There are rights, of course, around independent living, inclusive education, health, work, employment, equal recognition before the law. This is a big one for Ireland. As far as I understand, this is the main sticking point and why it hasn't been ratified to date. If you look back in history, if you look back at the equal recognition before the law of women, being able to own property, being able to choose who they marry. If you look most recently in Ireland about sexual orientation and choosing who you want to marry. If you look at equal recognition before the law in South Africa in the time of apartheid and what was possible then. In almost every group of people with different identities, they have equal rights on the same basis as others and equal recognition before the law. But there still remains two core groups of people in society who do not have their rights recognised on an equal basis with others in terms of equal recognition before the law and legal capacity. Those are people with intellectual disabilities and people with psychosocial disabilities, long-term mental health conditions. Somehow, governments have got really muddled up in thinking about intellectual disability and mental capacity and legal capacity and putting the two concepts together and saying, if you don't have mental capacity, you can't have legal capacity. In fact, they're two completely separate things. Most of us lose our mental capacity at some point. If you've been in the bar until 2 o'clock in the morning, you've probably lost some of your mental capacity, your judgment about what you can and can't do. If you've been in a long-term relationship and all of a sudden that person leaves you or dies, your mental capacity is going to be different. It's a very complex subject, mental capacity. We all make decisions in different ways. The environment that we're in, the context that we're in, the interplay of so many different things. We don't really understand how people make decisions. It's not an area that's been researched fully. And yet, people with mental health conditions or people with intellectual disabilities somehow have their legal rights taken away from them. They can't open a bank account. They can't own property. They can't choose who they marry. Their children might be taken away from them. In some countries, it's grounds for divorce. So it's really important, and it's not a difficult concept. But the Irish government, I think there's a sticking point there. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use the CRPD for you, very briefly. Then we're going to see a video, nice short video, just to break up the time. And then finally, I'll just give an introduction to the National Monitoring Mechanism. So how can you use the CRPD? You can use it when your government's ratified to hold them to account. Really clear. You've got a framework. You're meant to do this. These are the rights I have. These are the obligations on you. These are the responsibilities on you. You need to deliver. Ratification forces a number of different things when the government does ratify. It makes the government do an analysis of the law and look at all of the shortcomings of the laws and policies in the country. So the work that I was doing most recently in the Caribbean with governments there, they were saying, well, what are the benefits really of us ratifying? We just see it as lots of things we have to do, and we don't see a lot of benefits. But as soon as a country's ratified, they're fast-tracked to get technical assistance from the United Nations. The UN are there to help states parties. They're there to help the governments bring about domestic change. It also offers the opportunity of governments to benefit from the advice of a range of other international experts, to learn from other countries. So the South could learn from the North of Ireland about what's happened, although you don't have an assembly in place at the moment. It also means they can engage in a regular conference. It's called the Conference of States Parties. It happens in New York in the summertime. And all of the states that have ratified get together. They say for a few minutes what's good, what they've done well. But it's also a real opportunity for them to say, I'm really struggling with this. How do I do it? And get help, peer-to-peer help. As I mentioned, there's technical assistance and training. So the training that I just did for a week was capacity building training, explaining exactly what governments have to do, how they do it, and what's available to them in terms of help. Then Irish government, if they ratify, can nominate somebody to the CRPD committee. So the UK nominated myself, and I served my 4 years, and the Irish government could do the same too. So you could have an independent person speaking there. What crucially happens is actual improvement of human rights of persons with disabilities. For a government to sincerely ensure that their citizens are empowered, that there's social cohesion, it leads to a more stable society, not just in developing countries, but in developed countries too. We all know about hate crime that's targeted at persons with disabilities. But as I mentioned at the beginning, it's really an opportunity for critical self-assessment, to revise laws, policies, practices, and really to get on track and say, we're progressive. We know Ireland's progressive, so must ratify quickly. It gives, crucially, you the opportunity for you to recognise your rights enshrined within that and be able to hold your government to account. As Monica said at the beginning, there's been training that has happened in the north of Ireland, and I'm sure there are many trainings that you've been engaged with. But also you can learn from your peers. You can learn from other European countries, other people with disabilities around Europe who have already, their governments have ratified, and the way that they're building their capacity, the way that they're engaging and mobilising themselves. But you can also learn from women's organisations. The Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination, of all forms of discrimination against women, has been around for more than 30 years. There are very well-organised women's groups, very mobilised. I was involved with them when I was living in the north of Ireland a long time ago, and they're a very strong women's movement. They know how to engage with the UN. They've built their capacity. There are many lessons that you can learn from them. I say reach out to them. Find out the organisations that have already been to the United Nations and engaged, the way that they work with the government, the way that they've built networks, the way that they've really mobilised resources child rights movements as well. The Convention on the Rights of the Child been around for a long time. So don't stay in your silo of disability. Look wider. Engage with a vast range of different organisations to really give yourself as many skills as possible. But it really is nothing about you without you. So thank you very much indeed.